we all struggle with those. You might see a video and think, wow, this person is so confident. They don't care what anyone thinks, but that's just not the case.
I think the podcast is just a really cool, quick way to...
So again, the whole theme is about essentially starting a show and all the ins and outs of having a podcast or a vodcast as a content model. And so what I've got on the screen here is just a snippet from each of them. So Raquel's got a virtual podcast. Suzanne's got an in-person podcast. So what I'd love to do maybe for the first 5 minutes on this slide is kind of talk about some of the pros, cons, the trade-offs. I don't think there's even a right or wrong to both of those. There's a time and a place for both of those styles. But Suzanne, do you want to start with like, why did you launch a podcast and why is that important?
Yeah, so I think, quite a few people have talked about podcasts today. Not only do I feel that, like Justin was kind of saying, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about realtors in the industry. So I think the more information that we can get out to the public, the better. So not only do I feel it is amazing for networking and, building connections and communicating with other like-minded individuals or not like-minded. I think that's fun too. But ultimately, I think that we all have a story to tell, and the more we can tell our story, this really gives us a great opportunity to do so.
$1,000,000% agree on the opportunities to tell stories. And then just kind of, I think what she lightly touched on in the beginning there, having hundreds of realtors, Kyle mentioned this earlier, like what's the best way to communicate with a group of people? And so using one-to-many platforms is an easy place to start. But Raquel, similar question, like when did you, 123 episodes I think is what it was, you're probably more than that. But when did you start your podcast and why did you do that at the time?
So I started my podcast, this December will be 3 years. And I wanted to do a podcast because someone had challenged me, but I had bought the mic. I don't know if any of you guys could relate to this. I had bought the mic and it had sat in a closet for over a year. And I was like, what if, you have all these drunk monkey, they say, of what's going on in your head of like, who am I to start a podcast? And really what it came down to is I have a community called Play Bigger, and there's so many cool people in our community that I wanted to just interview and kind of share their story. And then it also gave us an opportunity that if they didn't know about Play Bigger, that they could really feel through our podcast, like what we were all about.
Yeah, there's something to be said about like long form too, because a lot of today has been about these vertical short reels, 20, 30 seconds, which is amazing, right? But like, have either of you ladies, and maybe we can start with Suzanne, like, even if it's just realtors in the business or anyone saying, like, is there anything you saw an indication where they sat down and watched it for longer than 30 seconds and that depth or that connection kind of paid off because it wasn't just a quick reel or something like that?
Yeah, I do feel, we talk about a hook, which is super important, but I also feel that people are kind of shifting to wanting to connect with people a little more. And what can you really, there are things you can do in 30 seconds, but I think one thing that we're really using the platform for is that deeper connection. Our podcast is all about real estate stories. So everyone in here has real estate stories, but so do consumers. So do people in business. That's a lot of times how they made their wealth. So I think, there's a story to tell there, and I think we all want to hear it, right? So having that and forming that deeper connection with people, we hear it all the time. Like, your story about purchasing the home in Spain, like that was, but I can't cover that in a 30-second reel. Right.
Same thing, Raquel. Anything you can think of when it comes to like the depth and the connection of a full episode versus like quick little TikToks?
So podcast is actually my favorite because if you listen to my podcast, you kind of know like the journey that I'm on. I'll share things on my podcast that I wouldn't share on social. Like you actually could follow what I'm going through probably week by week, whether it's things that I'm talking about with our clients, our private clients today. It could be about what my clients are struggling with, and I'll bring on guests like about video content or things like that. Or my kids that are in sports and life lessons that I'm hearing about from them. And I think the podcast is just a really cool, quick way to kind of document what's been going on. So it'd be really cool to see like my grandkids or that legacy of like, that's what my grandma was thinking at the time. I wish I had that from our ancestors or my great grand, parents and stuff.
It's, I think I said this earlier about my Instagram lives I did a while back, but to me, it is one of the best content hacks if you're not comfortable. So like, I literally couldn't, I have a video business today, I couldn't even look at a camera and talk. I couldn't even make it happen. But I could sit and talk to these two and like geek out about strategy or whatever, and just make sure that there's something recording. So finding some of these hacks are, sometimes the easy ways for you to unlock, another level for creating.
Just add something to that as well. I think sometimes you start a podcast or you start your Instagram page or you start a video with one purpose, and then you're surprised by how many people it actually touched. I mean, my son was actually just going through a whole recruiting season, and when I'd get to the college, I mean, he had 15 offers for D1, but when I'd get to the college, like, it's amazing even at a college level, they were like, I listened to your podcast to kind of get to know you guys first before you guys came on campus.
I don't know about you guys, but like we're driving now, I rarely listen to music. I try and find some sort of audio and use that time for education. But I want to talk about the in-person virtual kind of trade-offs a little bit. And then also, like, I think we have two unique perspectives in that. Obviously, Suzanne has run a massive business, but pretty recently launched her podcast. So I think if some of you are maybe only a few episodes in or you're thinking about doing your own, this can be some good insights. But it's kind of a two-part question, I guess. What's some advice to someone that's like, episode 1, I'm about to get going? Let's start with that question.
Yeah, I think everyone has said it today. It's just do it, film the episode. I think, for just like Conor said, for me, you might think that I'm very comfortable behind the camera and I can do it, but it's not my preference. And so even this in person and filming behind the camera, Cece knows, you got to kind of push me along a little bit to film these episodes. And so we all struggle with that same feeling. And I think, you guys knowing that, you see Justin and everything that he just talked about, but still knowing that we all struggle with those. You might see a video and think, wow, this person is so confident. They don't care what anyone thinks. But that's just not the case. I think we're all going through the same struggles. And the most important thing you can do is just turn the camera on and start having a conversation. I think that's one of the big reasons why I love the podcast, is because you're just talking to a friend, or a new friend very soon, but just having a conversation instead of, scripted behind the camera. So it comes across, especially if you are one of those people that struggles with that and coming up with content, let's just have a conversation, and it's going to come across more genuine. You'll create that connection, and that's what people really want anyway, right? So.
Love it. And I have another questions here, but kind of the way I sum that up too, I looked up this stat, and it was something like out of all the podcasts created, I think over 90% don't make it to like episode 15 or something like that. So literally you could be in like the top few percent if you just make 20 episodes. But the second question is this in-person versus virtual kind of dynamic. So like, what are the pros and cons of doing it in person? You absolutely could have, hopped on Zoom or StreamYard and some of these other platforms, but like, why in person, and then what are the trade-offs there?
There are definitely pros and cons, because I do feel like you can potentially miss out on some really great guests if you are not flexible with doing things virtually. So it's not to say that I absolutely won't do that, but I think the format of having someone there, connecting with them, and putting out that content, it's just something that we felt was going to be better for the brand long term. And then in addition, this isn't all about video. It's like you said, you're listening to it in your car. So, I think the fact that you can clip video and, use that for your reels, use that for other marketing verticals, that's huge, putting it on YouTube. So we just wanted it to look as clean as possible. But ultimately, there will be some guests that are absolutely not going to be able to be there in person. But as much as possible, I'd love to get face-to-face. Yeah.
hugely agree. I mean, that's a big reason why we're in this event, in this room today, is like we could have done like a Zoom webinar, we could have done a number of virtual things, but getting in person, saying what's up face to face just goes a long way. Raquel, kind of similar two-part question to you, but before we get to virtual and stuff, the first question on like quantity. So you're upwards over 100 and, I don't know, maybe 200 episodes, you tell me, but like now that you've done a couple years and a couple hundred episodes, like are there any themes or insights you feel like you can reflect on?
Oh, there's definitely some themes depending on the season, right? Because this is mainly for realtors or real estate investors. So there are different themes. And again, it's whatever my audience wants and whatever, like some of the DMs that I get, I want to make sure we answer it on the podcast. This is a free opportunity for them to listen to in the car. So if I look back at my first year, it was like, let's get whoever I can get, you know? And then now it's a little bit more strategic. And we do it obviously virtually. I would eventually love to go into in person. But I think it also is just about getting started, taking action. There are people on my podcast that I would have never ever had on my podcast had it not been virtual. Like I have one of Oprah's best friends that are on my podcast and we did a collaboration together and she spoke at my event. So that would have never happened if it was virtual because she's in Philadelphia. I'm here in Arizona, I should say.
Part of it is getting going, but then there is kind of a quality refinement. Like, who are you connecting with and collaborating with? Suzanne mentioned, I mean, if you're limited by your city or whatever it is, there's only so many connections. But virtual, like I'm even seeing international faces here. I mean, Brad McCallum up in Canada and stuff. So like, it gives you a chance to reach more people. But how about, can you talk real quick on like maybe the efficiency or the cadence? Like, how often do you do that? How doable is that? And what do you recommend?
Just like anything, how many of you guys struggle with like pushing content all the time, every single day, right? Consistency is a real thing, and it's the same thing with a podcast. We record, we batch, but we have a guest episode that drops every Tuesday and a solo episode that drops every Thursday. And there's a reason why I have a team, because they kind of push me on days I don't feel like it to kind of just stack all of our interviews. So we manage everything through ClickUp. That's the platform that we use for all of our projects, events, and everything. And so there is a template, there is a system, because I record and I have no idea. I'm sure there's a lot of pieces that happen on the back end, especially even with the marketing, that the team takes care of.
Okay. Very cool. I agree and see a lot of that. And now that is a kind of a good segue into how do we squeeze the juice from these episodes and these shows? Like, it's a screenshot of kind of clip or promo content that you've both had, whether you want to talk about social media, email, or any other ideas to get the word out there about your show. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so you're putting in a lot of time with these episodes. You're spending, you know, especially if you have a video crew and you're getting everything set up, and we've had that before where it's like, oh, things aren't working and we're all sitting in there, and you know, it's so you are investing time into this. So as much as you can get out of it, you know, you want to take those snippets and use them to your advantage. So we do the similar cadence. We do Tuesday and Friday for posts for our actual podcast. But in the meantime, during the week, we're posting teasers. We have it over every social media platform, and we're getting it out to as many people as possible. But you know, not using and taking advantage of all of the work that we put into it, chopping it up pretty easily, and then you know, pushing that content out.
Similar question in terms of distribution. Like, I'm on Raquel's email list for the podcast. If you're not, you definitely need to be on there. Very consistent, very thorough, but distribution ideas?
Yeah, we right now our focus for the team is to get on YouTube. So we've just started our YouTube channel and trying to push our views. In the beginning, when we started the podcast, we did the email list to push to Apple. Another thing that we did when we launched the podcast is we made a tentative, like we made a dead date, because remember, my microphone was in my closet for a long time. So I just made a commitment in front of a mastermind that I would get it out December 17th. It just seemed, that was like my birthday, so I was like, we got to do it. And in the beginning, when we had the emails, it would push to Apple Podcasts to try to get reviews, to try to get more downloads, to try to give us some analytics, because I am a big proponent on looking at analytics and looking at what your audience wants to make adjustments and changes. So that kind of gave us a baseline. Now we push our emails to YouTube. And I think it's really interesting Two is when we give the assets to our guests, you can see who actually will push it to their audience or who will actually share it. Because, I mean, there's a big difference in downloads. There's a big difference in views.
Email, YouTube, and creating clips, absolutely. How about real quick, how do you, or what would be your advice to getting guests?
This is great because I was laughing earlier when I think it was Neil that was like, oh, you just ask. So I have a funny story about just asking. I remember Conor was actually filming one of our first podcasts and we're like, oh yeah, Aaron Rodgers is coming on our podcast like really soon. That's totally happening. And he didn't take us seriously, of course, but he's like, really? That's a thing? But it was a thing. We actually, so, you know, my partner...
you spoke to him. You almost did.
It was so close, but he wanted $250,000. So we did ask, and he did say yes, but he wanted $250,000 for it. But no, that said, I think it is about asking. I mean, if you are in, I mean, even at these events, I was talking about it earlier, we started filming some content while we're here, but it's, you're in front of powerhouse agents all the time. So we all want to share on each other's networks. A lot of times we're not in direct competition with each other. Even if we are, I still want you on the podcast. Like, let's talk about it, you know? So it really does come down to pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and asking for, you know, for that Aaron Rodgers podcast. So stay tuned. You never know. I mean, eventually he might be on it.
Coming soon. How about you? How do you get your guests?
I mean, plain and simple, you ask, right? And I mean, we've said it today, is you don't get until you ask. I think when I started the podcast, my mentor Sharon had said, write down a list of people that you would absolutely love to have on your podcast. So we have a wish list as well. And so we kind of look at that and ask. But now that our podcast, I'll tell you on the other side, now that our podcast has been around for a long time, or I consider it long because over 90% like never stay consistent with it, we get pitches all day long to be on our podcast, and we're very, very selective. We want to use community first, our networks first, but every day I can tell you that we probably get anywhere between 10 to 12 to 15 requests to be on our podcast.
Yeah, there's probably this tipping point, and I'd seen this before too, where people start to feel like you're so aligned that they want to, obviously for their benefit, kind of be involved and to agree.
And we've never entertained sponsorship, but I think in this next phase, we may entertain sponsorships now.
Yeah, all part of the evolution, I think, is. How about, I mean, you both kind of touched on this, but more advice for preparing for like yourself in a way. Like, do you plan notes and topics? Do you have questions? Do you just go into it freestyle because you want it to be organic? Like, what's the preparation like or not like?
So I personally am a little more like, put me in, I'll do it on the spot, but there is something to be said about you need to at least have some sort of a guide. I think one thing that's a little different about my podcast is that my partner is involved as well. So it's both of us. And I think it kind of, you know, if you have the opportunity to do something like that and have that collaborative type of a situation, your partner can kind of pick up where you lack. So I think I have a really great dynamic where I'm better at some things and he's better at others. So he really takes a lot of time to plan before the podcast and come up with ideas. And he knows that I'm going to come in there and I'm going to throw in a little humor and, you know, I'm better on the fly. So I think the important thing is knowing your strength. If you need to take that time to prep, then you need to take that time to prep. But make sure that you know what you're talking about, because I do feel some of the podcasts that I've listened to, and I think one potential fail is the ramble, you know? So keeping it concise, and if you don't prep, I think your audience knows that you don't prep and you're not ready because they can hear it when you continue to just keep talking like I'm doing right now. So
No, I like that. I have almost a similar style where I kind of like to extreme prep, but then cut it off. Like I considered coming up here having notes for questions and some of this stuff, but it doesn't really allow for the organic vibe. So I think finding your balance of, you know, preparation and being natural with it. Anything you want to add to the preparation stuff, or?
I would say she's absolutely right when it comes to prepping. Your audience is going to know. So the first thing that we do with the team is they actually will research, because a lot of our guests will give us their bio, but we also are realtors that they're always so busy that they don't get it. So where do they go? They go to LinkedIn, they go to all their social channels. They try to find as much information so that I can kind of look at, who we're interviewing if I don't know them or if I haven't had like much conversations with them. And then I usually will have a topic on why I want them on the podcast. And then I think about the audience of what is our ideal, our realtors, what do they want to know from this person? If we were sitting and having coffee, what would they want to know from Jocelyn? What would they want to know from Joe, George, or whoever, or Connor? Like, what would they want to know about video?
I like the idea of thinking about what's like the end kind of result we're trying to get out of this. Couple of last kind of quick hitting questions, and then we got an example or two, but should everyone start a podcast? Like if you're a new agent, if you're a top producer, like is there a version for everyone?
Like I said, I think everyone has a story to tell. So I don't see a reason why you wouldn't put yourself out there and start creating content that you can use in multiple avenues. Everyone has something they want to talk about, and it doesn't necessarily need to be solely real estate related as well. So I think if you are passionate about it and it's something that that you feel comfortable doing or uncomfortable, but that you can execute on, do it. Why wouldn't you do it? Tell your story, because ultimately that's what your audience wants to know. Why are you different from the hundreds of other real estate agents in the field? So whether you're talking specifically about real estate, it's the same theme that we've been talking about all day, even for social media content. It's the same concept of, tell your story, open up a little bit. It doesn't have to be all business. I think just getting out in front of a bunch of people, what's the harm in that? Give it a go.
How about, Raquel, I want to ask you on mistakes, since you've done hundreds of episodes. Like, what are some of the big, red flags or mistakes you see people doing when they jump into this?
Rambling. That would be my first one, is like if you listen, how many of you guys listen to podcasts? Yeah, and you just sometimes will skip the intro because they're like rambling. I'm like 10 seconds, press till like they get into the meat and potatoes. I would also think about a mistake that we did is we switched podcast teams. And we lost a bunch of our episodes, and then we had to find them and then upload them, and we also switched platforms. So just stick to one. Even if there's a new bright and shiny object, stick to your original, because it'll still be there. Because if we didn't have the podcast with Kenny, he was my guest number one, it's hard to just try to fish all that and like re-upload it in a timely manner.
Yeah, like you're saying, there's so much gold and effort that goes into that, so you want to make sure long-term we're doing that. So wrapping up, I've got 2 video examples. We'll play each of these one at a time, but both of these are actual clips from a podcast that obviously they were in and on. But I guess I'd be more interested in hearing, since it's very relevant, the things that you both say in these clips, almost like your 2 cents on the message that's in the reel.
If you know what to do in a transaction from start to finish, you are showing your value. I think so many agents don't do that because they get into real estate because they think it's fast money and they can do it on the side, but they don't become an expert in their craft. And it gives all real estate agents a bad name, honestly. So that's why I'm very big on making sure that you are doing your job to the best of your abilities at all times.
What does that mean? Go ahead, elaborate.
So we were talking about the NAR settlement and how changes look moving forward, and with some buyers agents being a little concerned about what that looks like in the landscape moving forward. And to me, I think my message there was I am constantly doing what I can to show my value. Even though I'm not doing transactions anymore, even my agents that are at the brokerage know that I will show them my value right now, and I think that we're in a constant state of that. It doesn't really matter what industry you're in, but I have had buyers, as I'm sure you guys have as well, that are like, how can I pay you? I want to pay you, because I go above and beyond. And so that was kind of on that note of there's really no reason to be concerned if you are putting that value out there. Your clients will recognize it, and you're gonna get paid.
So spot on. Makes a ton of sense. All right, let's play Raquel's video, and then we'll get her take on that too.
I learned this early on from a mentor, is anytime that you have butterflies, just always know that it is a sign of expansion. So you've got to push forward and you've got to push through. So every time I felt those, whether it's getting on stage or getting in those rooms, I've got to push through. There's a reason somehow, whatever you believe in, God or whatever, is he put me in a place either to learn a lesson or to learn from these people, but I belong here.
What does that mean?
You know, we're always nervous, and I think I did a post today this morning, is you're not ready for what you actually want to achieve, your big dreams, your big goals, but it's through action that you get the reps that make you ready. That's it.
I love it. Showing up even when you don't feel like it. Let's give a round of applause to these ladies. Awesome job.